Hello everyone, I'm assuming you're all there. I'm Paul McIntyre, Editor-in-Chief at AdNews, and I have Robert Rose, someone who knows more about content marketing than I do, and probably most of us, on the line from LA, and we're going to have a yak about all things content marketing. We had a quick chat before this started, and Robert's got some very interesting things to say. He's just come out the back of the CMI, the Content Marketing Institute's executive forum, where I think, Robert, there was, 100 top executives anyway, marketing guys and marketing people in the US coming from your big executive summit. Some really interesting themes come out of that based on the chat we've just had. You might want to just run past those key themes, Robert, which are, who owns content marketing, the struggle that's going on inside companies about where it sits, how it's run, the resource allocated, and measurability. There's a couple of things that we'll talk about, but welcome to Australia virtually, and let's hear what the guru has to say about all things content marketing. It's a big theme. Just by the way, you'll know you just said you're down here in April, but it's on our radar. It's top of mind. A lot of talk about it. What the hell do we do with it? So hopefully we'll have some clarity after this 30-minute session. By the way, we're going to open. If you have any questions, type them in, and we will throw them at Robert as we go through this 30-minute session. But welcome, Robert, and just give us that top line summary we were talking about from the executive forum on the challenges, the pros and cons of content marketing, and where the US marketers are at least in managing this.
Sure. Well, and thank you for having me. It's always, like Australia is. When we were there in April, I've told many people that if there were any other place on the planet that I could live, it would be Australia. Every time I'm there, I have a ball and enjoy myself immensely, and it reminds me so much of home. This is home for me, is Los Angeles, of course, and so we did. And thank you for asking. Yeah, the executive summit that we had just last week in San Francisco, actually. We had all these people, and there were really senior people trying to make content marketing as a process work, right? So not just working at that cubicle level, trying to understand, how to make our tags work better or the blogs work better, but really as a strategic function in our business. These business leaders were coming, and we were really working toward what are the big problems of actually implementing content marketing as a strategic function within the business. And two really key themes came out of that. One was this, and they're both related, of course, and the first was really this idea of where should it live in the business, right? Does it live in brand? Does it live in corporate communications? In one very successful example, it lives in the CRM function, customer loyalty function. Should it live in corporate communications or PR? And there are a lot of different arguments, some good, some not as good, for where it should live in the business, and I'll give you my take on that in just a minute. But the second theme that really came out of that was this idea of measurability, and how, one, for those organizations that are trying to get a content marketing function rolling, how do they actually create a business case that actually makes the case that this is going to do something to move the needle on the business? And then more sort of pointedly, because these are all, of course, executives that had started content marketing in some form or fashion, how do we actually show results over time so that we can actually justify its continuing existence? There were no real sort of aha moments out of that. Unfortunately, it was a lot more questions than there were answers. The two key ideas that I took out of it were, one, that right now the silos that we have right now, content marketing is operating usually in a silo in the organization, and its job really is to start to bridge all of those different silos together. So whether it's creating demand generation, a bridge over to PR, and a bridge over to brand, and a bridge over to demand generation and the web team and all of this, content marketing can start to act as that bridge. So I actually think it's a separate function even there. So whether it reports up to or dotted line or center of excellence, I think is less important than an organization needs to exist, not just for the sake of another silo, but an actual organization that exists for the function of managing and creating content as a strategic asset for the business. And then secondly, on the measurability side, which we can get into if you like, it's this idea that we need to understand what goal we're trying to affect, because it's so holistic throughout, the creating brand awareness all the way to creating more customer loyalty. We need to understand which part of the funnel we're trying to fix And so where content can have its most effective purpose first, and then start to figure out how content is going to draw more effectiveness into whatever we're doing, whether it's advertising, whether it's PR, whether it's customer loyalty programs, all of which can be made more effective with content marketing. But most of the time we start from content first and then figure out a goal to support it, and that's the biggest key insight from the
and I think
forum.
we'll come back to that notion that there's probably a desire by a lot of companies to try and link it to a direct sales process, or how does it influence sales, which is a grand theory of everything and a universal black box we probably haven't got to yet. But let's go back to the who owns it, because it's interesting.
Content marketing.
Yes, exactly. The particle accelerator, I think, or something, isn't it? Is that what it is?
Exactly.
So the issue around who owns it, we're seeing here in Australia, we have got ANZ, for instance, a bank here, which is the function is being run by corporate affairs, and it's a direct report through the CEO via the corporate affairs director. In other instances, we've got GE, like you will have in the US, GE, KFC, and a whole bunch of others that are doing it through the marketing function. So I guess, what are you seeing in terms of who's owning it at the moment in the US with US companies? Where is the majority of the responsibility lying, and where we might see a shake-up in that? Is there something on the horizon there?
Yeah. So the answer is all of the above, where we're seeing it here. I mean, what has truly happened is, for better or for worse, content marketing is a practitioner-led function. So in other words, it's not being driven down by the CMO or the CEO or anywhere in the C-suite, quite frankly. So what happens typically is, within the organization, some function decides content marketing is something that we want to do. Most often what we see, quite frankly, is this is happening in the demand generation for B2B. So read into that basically the lead nurturing team, whoever's trying to figure lead nurturing and sales enablement, or PR, corporate affairs, or the brand for B2C, brand awareness, right? So those are the two immediate opportunities that usually come up when we go, where should we start with content marketing? Oh, SEO, getting more leads in the door for B2B. Oh, brand awareness and brand recall for B2C. So that's where we're seeing it start as sort of a seed and then spreading out from there. And the big challenge, quite frankly, and really I think feeds into what we saw at Executive Forum, was the company then goes, okay, now what, right? Now how do we actually scale this? How is this something that we scale across the business? And that's really where the hard work begins. The second part of your question is that where we actually see the measurability coming in is through some effectiveness in driving a lead or a sale or brand recall, and that's where we're seeing a lot of the sort of the proof of life, as it were, to sort of continue the program.
So are you saying that there is some discussion here about which function owns it, and I guess the tone or the risk preparedness for different departments? Corporate affairs tend to be more risk averse and sort of keeping it careful and very straight. The marketing side will be looking to, particularly in the B2C context, will be looking to do crazy stuff that engages, that gets attention and makes something fun. There is a dilemma there, or is there a dilemma there, or a tension at least, in terms of whoever owns it and what the tone and the strategy of the content that comes out, probably in a B2C versus a B2B context?
Yeah, I mean, the corporate affairs are cleaning up the mess that marketing creates, right?
Right, right.
And so, and that's not any different here either. It's, you've got this idea that marketing wants to do really cutting edge, interesting things, and in many cases, quite frankly, that's getting fed out of advertising programs. So the content marketing that is getting created here at the ad agency or big brand level is in many ways just really side alleys and side streets of the ad campaigns that they've got going on, whether it's B-roll footage from their TV ad campaign, or whether it's the celebrity that they hired for their big print campaign doing other weird things like a Twitter chat or something odd or edgy. And then you've got corporate affairs, which typically doesn't get any of the sexy stuff that the brand is doing, trying to figure out, well, how do I match that tone of voice, because I've got analyst relations to deal with, I've got the press to deal with, and I'm trying to deal with all of that. And in those cases, where we're seeing success is where brand and PR can come together and really bridge a tone of voice or a content strategy more holistically. And it's difficult, and it's one of those things where the agencies have to come together, the actual departments in the company has to come together, and where we're actually seeing companies do that, successfully bring those two things together, are where they're actually giving someone in charge of content, right? So it's not just saying, well, brand is doing their content and corporate affairs is doing their content, figure it out. It's actually, no, we're going to put somebody in charge, whether it's, somebody who's already existing in the business or we're hiring for it. They're going to be in charge of content as a strategic asset and how we communicate broadly. Now, go figure out how that works consistently and holistically at the brand level, at the PR level, at the demand gen level, at the CRM level. And that's the really interesting thing is that content itself is becoming, what we're seeing is that brands are recognizing that content and the creation of it is itself a strategic process. It's an asset worth managing carefully. And so once the company realizes that and starts to really think about that and all of the different channels by which it's going to communicate through that content, now it's a much easier argument to make of why it should exist as a function, and then it's just a matter of how do we actually make it work across all those different departments, either with a participatory team from all the different departments or with a separate team that actually communicates to all the departments.
So let's go to a practical example. You were talking earlier about what Kraft is doing in the US. Just give us an outline of their deployment of this content strategy. I think you were saying that that's an interesting one.
It's a really interesting one because, and the reason I love telling this story so much, and Julie Fleischer, who runs this program over at Kraft, is probably tired of me talking about her so much because I love telling her story. What was so interesting about what they've gone through is that the immediate inclination for us as marketers is to look at content marketing and go, okay, it's really, we've just been talking about it, it's either the very top of the funnel or we're trying to do something to generate more leads or whatever it is. And they took a really different approach. What she's been able to do is create through, so they had Food and Family magazine, which is their print magazine, and they've had that forever. And she, in fact, inherited it as part of her initial job. And then they moved it. They said, look, it's too expensive to do this print magazine. We're not going to do it anymore. She said, well, wait a minute, let's do it, but let's make people pay for it. And they lost a few subscribers, but they actually now have about 3.5 million subscribers to the print magazine who pay for it, and they pay for the actual magazine. And then they actually have 3.5 million subscribers to their email, their online version of the same thing, same content, just different platform, and they have recipes and articles about making food and all of that. But it's not about brand recall, and it's not about putting more people to buy cake mix or mayonnaise or anything like that. What she did was she set up this internal center of excellence with this program, the print magazine and online. She collects all the data from both, assimilates all of that data, and then basically using an internal cost structure sells it back to the product managers who are doing things like TV ad buys, print ad buys, et cetera, and says, look, with this data, we're going to make your ad buy 10%, 15%, 20% more effective. You're going to save money, get more effectiveness out of your traditional advertising buy with this data that you can get nowhere else. And that's how she's justifying it.
What's the data? It's a really, on an ROI basis and a pure financial cost reduction or efficiency basis, it's a good argument, right? What is the data? What is the data throwing up that allows them to be better at the TV or the main media buy and beyond?
Well, they're struggling with the same thing that everybody's struggling with now, right? When it comes to advertising, which is when we're doing a TV ad buy, where the audiences are fragmenting across cable television, across broadcast TV, across the internet, across all these different platforms, social, and where are they actually going? In other words, I'm selling mayonnaise, or I'm selling cake batter mix, or I'm selling salad dressing, or all of these are different ultimate targeted ads, and so that's those iterative loops are getting smaller and smaller. The whole idea of programmatic advertising is huge here, and so how do we automate ad buying across networks? How do we automate ad buying across TV platforms? Where do we tell our agencies to spend our $200 million that we're going to go spend on advertising by? They're taking that data and saying, we know who these people are. We know what products they like. We know what geographies they're in. We know what stores they shop in. We know what recipes they're downloading. They have so much data about these customers and how they're actually purchasing the products that they sell. Because of course, and by the way, it's not just their products. There's, because of recipes, they know what kinds of foods they're making their family, what recipes are most popular. So they know actually how to tell their agencies and their product managers who are managing all these brands, and I think they have 50 or 60 different brands at this point. They're how to do that in a much more effective way, so that even if they save 2 or 3% on a $200 million ad buy over the course of a year, I mean, it's
and it gets us to this
ROI.
measurability issue, because in the executive, I'm calling it forum, but it was, what is it, summit or something? What was it called? The executive. Forum, right?
Executive forum, yeah.
Gotcha.
So
in that, there was still discussions about whether we should do content, whether we shouldn't, what's for, how deeply do we go? Are we going to take this seriously? The measurability thing is where everyone's obviously trying to link it back directly to a sale of some sort, but there is a role for brand, the whole customer relationship thing, involvement, engagement, that may not link to a sale directly immediately, but we need to be able to show that so we can improve the investment is worthwhile. So that measurability thing, how many people are actually really seriously trying to look at it as a direct sales tool, or finding a link to the sale, versus trying to build equity into the brand or the product for in mid to long term? So it's short versus mid to long term, I guess, is the.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting way, and a good way, I think, to phrase the question, because I think there are ways to do both. One of the pat answers that I think is quite unacceptable, quite frankly, is when somebody says, well, we can't measure content marketing in the short term. You have to give it a year, or you have to give it 2 years to be able to measure anything. Well, that's not true. You can measure lots of things to let you know how you're progressing toward a goal. The key is you have to have a goal, right? And so that's where many people sort of stumble in the beginning, is they don't actually create a goal for themselves and then measure toward that goal. They actually just start it and say, hey, listen, let's just start measuring stuff. So there are short-term sales efforts that can be absolutely improved with content marketing. And then there are long-term things like increasing the value of a customer. I'll give you an example. I was working with a B2B organization where they were doing some advertising, search, Google ads, that sort of thing. And we did a content marketing program where we switched off all their advertising from, instead of call a salesperson or get a free trial of this thing or whatever it was, to content, moving all their online advertising to advertising content, white papers, their blog, their social programs. And what happened was, after about 6 months, because we wanted an entire sales cycle to actually be able to measure, so it took one sales cycle. After that 6 months of sales cycle, we looked, CEO comes to me and he says, hey, listen, here it's not working. We just measured and we closed the same number of customers, but it took them 1.5 times as long because they were still in the sales process, and it's costing us 1.2 times the cost. And I said, yes, but let's look at the customers that are closed. When we looked at the customers that they actually closed, it was the same number of customers that they closed, but those customers spent twice as much. They ended up staying 5 times as long with the company, and they were twice as likely to share their story with a colleague or a friend, or talk in a testimonial or press release. So why is that true? Because they took the time during the sales process to engage that customer with content, teach them about all of the different things that the company offered, so they were much more likely to buy more stuff during their elongated sales process, and ultimately bought into the approach, the differentiation that company provided. So instead of just responding to a coupon at the end of the quarter, or a sales guy trying to make his quota going, hey, if you buy this thing, I'll give you a 15% discount, they were actually creating, through a more elongated and honestly costly process, a much more valuable customer. So that's the kind of measurement we can look at long term. Short term, we can look at things like how many more leads are we producing, or how many more visitors are we getting from a brand perspective into our funnel to start that lead generation process.
That's good.
it's really looking at measurement from a holistic process and say, what is it we're trying to achieve with this, and then working backward from that to get to the steps to actually creating.
It's good. So listen, I think my clock says we've got 7 minutes left. So if there's questions, throw them to Robert, and I'll ask them for you for the rest of the troopers that are on the whatever we call this, a webcast. You talked about B2B driving the content marketing movement, I guess, in the early stages. So it was B2B and it's moving to B2C. Firstly, have I got that right? But secondly, can everyone and should everyone do this, or is it you've really got to look hard before you decide to go into this, or how far you go into it? And by the way, Robert, when every company is starting to go, shit, we need to do content, and everyone's in it, suddenly it becomes a massively competitive and potentially cluttered up sort of environment when everyone in every sector is racing there. So is there a role, should everyone be thinking about it, or is it to a degree that they should all be doing it, but to what degree? B2B and B2C, by the way.
Well, that's the answer, right?
Okay,
I mean,
so
the real question is, yeah, exactly. We should all be doing it, but to what degree? I mean, and you said something key there, I think, which is, should we look long and hard at it? Yes, you should look long and hard at it, but you absolutely should do it in some degree. I mean, I firmly believe that every company now, their content will affect the business. The only question now is how it's going to affect the business. There's no question that companies are creating more content. I don't care who you are creating more content that you are using for sales, you're using for marketing, you're using for publicity purposes that you've ever done before. There's no doubt about that. You've built a website, you're sending emails, you're doing it already. The only question now is, how is it going to impact your business? Are you going to let the conversation happen without you out here, or are you going to lead and facilitate that conversation? That's the question. So it's not a question of whether content will affect your business. It will. The question is, how will it affect your business, and whether you'll take the leadership to do that. And I believe you should think it through, do the hard work of the strategy, figure out the plan, understand your goals, what part of the funnel you're trying to optimize first, and then build out from that. But that's the critical point. Yes, think hard and do it, but it is something that every business will, a boss of mine a long time ago in the early 90s said, basically, not every company will have a website, but every successful company will.
Yes.
And I believe the same thing now about a content marketing strategy. Not every company will have a content marketing strategy, but every successful.
We've got a couple of questions coming through, but if we get the chance before we finish, it's really important, I think, for our audience in Australia to understand the myth that you talked about earlier with search engine optimization, and how in the US there was some big, we got carried away, or you guys got carried away with SEO as the be-all and end-all. But I want to go to some questions here first. So that's kind of, and also the differences between the US and Australia, Robert. You talked about Australia probably avoiding some of the mistakes that you've made in the US and getting some shortcuts, and we're fast learners. There's a couple of points that we may get back to. But we've got a question here from Ruth saying, there is a fine line between content being educational and yet still highlighting company benefits and self-interest. What is the right mix?
I don't believe that fine line is so fine. The great content can be educational, and by the way, I don't believe it has to always be educational. It can be entertaining as well. If you're focused on education and how to, and really educating your audience to a particular approach that your business has, that's fantastic. It's a utility. The Jay Baer sort of book and concept is a wonderful one to talk about how you be educational. The line between those things is where we're talking about our product or service or us versus what we're talking about. What we stand for, what our point of view on the world is different. That's the line, right? So when we start talking about ourselves, that's when it becomes marketing material and not content marketing.
Right. Elizabeth says, what do you think about the role of technology platforms in content marketing? How do platforms? Right.
In a word, they're good. I think marketing now has more technology than it knows what to do with. Every single time I hear that it's a technology problem, it never is. It's usually a process problem. So the challenge now isn't whether we have enough data or whether we have enough technology. We have enough of both. The question is, how do we use the tools that we have, and how do we ask better questions of the data we're collecting?
Yes, platforms are playing a huge role, though. We'll come back to it. Another one here from Haley saying, should we place SEM and content teams together, or use SEM as a resource to create content?
Both, I think. Yeah, so that B2B example that I gave earlier, SEM was a huge piece of that, right? So they had replaced all their Google ads with advertising for content, and saw that were able to track that great efficacy, and basically brought down the cost of their CPC, cost per conversion, on SEM quite a bit by starting to really integrate the idea of advertising content through Google ads rather than, and by the way, on SEM, it makes the retargeting network work so much better. Because now, instead of your ad saying, talk to a sales guy or click here to go to our website or whatever, it's actually, when you're experiencing content on YouTube or whatever website you happen to be on, it's now actually advertising a piece of content, which is much more attractive to an audience to want to click on, rather than sort of a direct call to action like we're so used to doing.
Which gets us to, I think we've got 32 seconds left, but or there's a little bit more, I think. But Robert, the search, this SEO conundrum, which you talked about in the US, which 2010 to 2012-13, there was an obsession with it, and it's pulled back a bit, and there's some downside to it. Quickly overlay that for us.
Sure. Well, this comes to the point where we were talking before the show started, basically, that the Australian market is avoiding some of the mistakes that the American market made. And I think in many ways, certainly you can argue that Australia is a fast follower, but I think in many ways the Australian market may quite frankly surpass the U.S. market if we don't get our act together, because you're avoiding some of the mistakes that we made, and namely the SEO one, where we got wrapped around the axle of trying to figure out how to feed a content machine. SEO consultants going into business and saying, if you're not blogging 5 times a week, you're doing it wrong. If you're not stuffing your blog post full of keywords, you're doing it wrong. If you're not tweeting out 1,000 times a day, you're doing it wrong. And we got really wrapped into this SEO trap, where now marketing teams are now stuck in this machine of trying to produce so much content that they're quite frankly not producing very great content at all. And so the question always comes up to me at a conference like, well, our SEO consultant told us we need to be producing 5 blogs a week. Well, that's not true. Well, how much should we be producing then is always the inevitable question. And the answer to it is, frustratingly, as much content as you can be great at. And as long as you can be great at it, produce as much as you can. And that's the real key. It's not about optimizing for a click to your website. It's about what they do when they get to your website. I would much rather have 100 engaged, wonderfully engaged users that actually do something on my website than 1,000 who just click through and go, this is crap, and bounce away.
Right.
And
so
you
I
guys
think
figured that out much faster than we did.
Because we're really clever. Is that what you're saying?
Well, that's true. That's absolutely true.
That was a little bit of a
and I'm
joke,
not just sucking up to the Australian. I'm not. You can buy me a beer when I'm there next.
Yeah, you want to come out here and live. I know your type. Hey, so look, I don't know how much time we've got, but there's one final question from Roger saying, any advice in doing content marketing for how to position an opinion so it doesn't sound too obvious and marketing-like, i.e. a spruik, genuine, authentic? How do you get away from, look, I'm fantastic?
Sure. As long as the opinion is about what the approach of the business is, in other words, what does the business stand for, the brand promise, really, and not the product, then it's take as strong a position as you possibly can with that brand. One of the questions that often comes up to me is, should we be do we have to be controversial these days? Do we have to show the guy getting kicked in the you-know-what to actually get attention? And the answer to that is no, but yes, to the extent that your brand can support it. If your brand supports something with a really strong point of view, by all means take it. But the point of view should be in the brand promise, what it is you stand for, right? So if you're Apple Computer, just to use an example, it's about how I make my life better with technology. If you can take a really strong point of view on why your life will be better with technology, that's supportive of the brand, but it's not selling the product, and that's the real difference.
Yeah, that's good. I think we're out of time. I've actually, I don't know about the rest of the troops, but I've actually enjoyed it, so that's a good start. You're all right. So thanks,
Oh,
Robert.
thank you.
You go back to, I don't know what time it is over there, but go back to sleep or whatever you're doing in LA, and we will talk soon.
It's late here. I'm
When
about to
you're out.
start drinking beer. Yeah.
Hey, well, I'm coming over. Hey, thanks for your time. It was really interesting.
Thank you very
Good
much
one.
for having me. I really appreciate it.